All right, guys, so we move from Abel, who we saw was the first sacrifice, the first human sacrifice, the first Christian martyr. So we move from him now to the next passage in Hebrews 11, chapters 5 through 6. So I'm going to read that, and then I'm going to read Genesis 5:24, because the passage in Genesis is also really short. So, Hebrews 5:11 to 6. By faith Enoch was taken from this life, so that he did not experience death. He could not be found, because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists, and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. And then Genesis 5:24 says, just one verse, Enoch walked faithfully with God, then he was no more, because God took him. So the sinner who through faith in the sacrifice, which we saw in Abel, and then of course we see that more fully in Jesus, the sinner who through faith in the sacrifice is righteous before God, belongs now to God, and is an heir of eternal life. Sin and death have no more dominion over him. Thus Enoch, who coincidentally is the seventh in line from Adam, and if you know anything about numbers in the Bible, 7 is the number of completion. There's 7 days in creation. In Revelation, you see 7 bowls, 7 seals, 7 trumpets. The number 7 is just repeated a lot through the Bible as the number of God's completion, of God, things being completed. So Enoch is the 7th from Adam. He walks with God. In this simple, familiar expression, we have the description of the new life. It brings before us communion with God, dependence on his guidance, submission to his authority, confidence in his love and favor, continuous habitual fellowship, and a mind conformed to God's mind, and delighting itself in the Lord. How awesome does that sound? Communion with God, dependence on his guidance, submission to authority, confidence in his love and favor. That's a big one. Continuous habitual fellowship. How great does that sound? And a mind conformed to God's mind. This is our aim as believers. And this is the faith that Enoch had. This should be our aim. And of course, Enoch is the first one to sort of defeat death by not having to go through physical death. But of course, there's still one who is greater. Jesus is the one to ultimately defeat death by his own death. By his death, he defeats death. The God who took Enoch up, and then the only other person to not die would be Elijah, taken up in chariots of fire. That same God lives inside of us today, if we have that faith. And through sanctification, and through becoming more like Christ and dependence on Christ, this is where we grow in these things. It's where we grow in continuous habitual fellowship. It's where we grow in communion with God. It's where we grow in dependence on his guidance. And these are things that God helps us with through the Spirit, through what we call the means of grace, through prayer, through the Lord's Supper, which sadly we can't celebrate right now because we're in this time of quarantine and social distancing. But the Lord's Supper, things like this are ways that God draws near to us. And it all happens through his Spirit, which was poured out originally at Pentecost and continues to live inside of us, believers today. So, application. Seeing Jesus all throughout the Bible. It's one that's going to happen in every single one. He was there at creation. He's the greater picture of sacrifice, like Abel was. And of course, in Enoch, he's the one to ultimately defeat death. Just like Enoch defeated death through his walking with God, so does Christ. This is the one that we should put our faith in. This is the one that can help us grow in all of these things. Pray for that kind of a faith. Give thanks to God who has already poured out so much grace on us. Enoch is an incredible picture of grace because, just imagine walking with God. Like Adam and Eve in the garden, it says they walked with God. Imagine this is what we strive for. And it's what we will receive one day when Christ returns and he makes all things new. We will have this walking with God, this perfect communion with God. This should be our aim. It should be our prayer. We should pray for this to come. We should pray for this to happen as soon as possible. So this is our prayer. Jesus is the one we put our faith in, and he's the one who is ultimately going to make all things new again.